Hi everyone. My name is Marissa Shallcross. I'm a career counselor in the Career Development Center here at Emerson. We are here today to talk to you about writing a resume. I'm going to let my colleague introduce himself and then we'll get started.
Hi, my name is Drew. I'm the internship administrator with the Career Development Center. Also, I use they, them pronouns. And Marissa and I are just going to be tossing back and forth on how to write a successful resume.
And I want to say too, as we're going through this workshop, feel free, like it's a small group, so we'll probably be able to answer questions as we go. It might be easiest to just enter them in the chat and Drew will be reading your questions and making sure they get answered. So feel free to ask questions anytime. We'll also have some dedicated time at the end for questions if there's anything we missed, but we will get started. So, okay. All right, so the Career Development Center, how many of you know about us? Do any of you know what we do? Yeah, a little bit. So normally we're located in 216 Tremont. This semester we're working remotely, but you can still use all of our services from wherever you are, whether you're on campus or at home or elsewhere. A few of our key resources that we mention here, one is Handshake, which is our job and internship database. You can also make appointments with us on Handshake. Another is CareerBuzz. It's just careerbuzz.emerson.edu. And I'll email you after the workshop with some links to resources so you have that. But on CareerBuzz, we have tons of resources, so guides on everything from like how to write a resume and cover letter to sample resumes to advice on networking and job search and kind of anything you can imagine. We also have a blog there and feature some internship and job opportunities, and we have an online resume checkup where you can submit your resume for review. So all of that's available online anytime. And today specifically, as you know, we're here to talk to you about writing a resume and how to put together a resume. So I guess as we're getting started, does anyone have a resume or have you written one before? A little bit?
Yeah.
A lot of times students, oh, sorry, go ahead, Drew.
Oh, go ahead. I was going to ask, has anyone used our online resume review portal?
Well, maybe after this workshop. So the purpose of a resume, which you probably know, is to provide a summary of your experiences. So it's kind of like a snapshot of your story as it relates to the position that you're applying for. So it's sort of like a sales pitch in a sense on a document. There's a lot of things about a resume that are sort of subjective, but there are a few things that we kind of consider to be rules. One is it should be one page. As students, even for very long in your professional career, I typically use a one-page resume for myself, and I've been working for like 10 years since grad school. So you want to keep it one page as much as possible because it's going to be skimmed quickly. The next is reverse chronological order. So as we're going to talk about today, you're likely to have multiple sections on a resume. In each section is going to go in reverse chronological order, meaning the most recent experience is first. Finally, targeted versus master. So I often tell students, like, you're likely to have more than one version of your resume because your resume has to be targeted to the type of position that you're applying for. So if you're applying for a part-time admin job on campus, you're going to be probably using a slightly different resume than if you're applying for an internship in the industry you really want to work in. And it depends on what you've done and what you're looking to do, but often you'll have, even if it's slight differences, more than one version of your resume. So you're going to have these targeted resumes, but then you might also want to keep a master resume on your computer, and it could be 5 pages long. It doesn't really matter, but it can list everything you've done with bullet points so that when you're tailoring a resume for a certain position, you can easily kind of swap things in and out as needed for that specific position. And now I'm going to hand it over to Drew to talk about how to get started on putting your resume together.
Cool. So when you get started on your resume, it's definitely a big bulk of brainstorming. I mean, as Marissa said, I've also been working for many, many years, and I constantly redo my resume and keep it on one page. So the main key points that you want to have on that resume are education, school involvement or on-campus jobs, any projects or like freelancing work that you've done, volunteer experiences or internship experiences that you've had. You can also include those pay-the-bill type jobs, so like working in a cafe or working in retail to show the employers your work background. And then your skills, so hard skills and soft skills. So those hard skills are the technical software skills like Google Suite, Microsoft Office, Those soft skills are like interpersonal skills, so things you can do in the office regarding communication. So the best way I do this is kind of creating a web map and going along with that, and then creating a big bulk resume.
Great. Oops.
Can you go to the next one, Marissa? I'm sorry. Yep. It's hard not, I was clicking it thinking that I can do it.
I know.
So there's no wrong way to create a resume. There's just some suggestions that we add for you guys. So with the template, you can use like Canva, Google Docs, Word. They create templates for you that are free and easy to use. So with limitations like that, you want to be wary that they are templates and that other people can use them. So you definitely want to use it as a starting point. But you don't want to make that your whole resume because someone else could also have a very identical resume. Starting from scratch is also great using a form like Google Docs or InDesign. It's easier to edit and you have some freedom with formatting. The issue is that you also have that freedom with formatting, so you want to make sure everything is very consistent in regards to text, font, the style that you're using, and the overall layout. So structures is pretty simple. This layout can be changed in regards to font and color, but always your heading wants to be up at the top. So your name and contact info, so direct phone number, direct email, and we also suggest putting a portfolio if you have one. So like Vimeo or YouTube page. Your education follows that. So if you haven't graduated yet, that's fine. You can easily put your expected graduation date so the reader understands what program you're involved in. And then your experiences is the major highlight of that page. So that's jobs, that's internships, related experiences like those pay the bill type jobs. And then skills are something that follows at the end. So this is a basic layout here of how everything should look, with the experiences being the highlight, and then your education, name, and skills following on the outskirts.
Great, thanks,
And
Drew.
I'm going to pass it over to Marissa.
Sorry to talk over you there. So we want to talk a little bit about the different sections on your resume. So the first section is going to be the header. So that's what Drew just showed you. That's at the top of your resume. And that's where it's really important. And a lot of times this might be a place where you can be a little bit, we'll talk a little bit more about like, how creative your resume should be. I know Drew talked about different templates and different kind of programs to create it. Sometimes the heading, like if a student wants to kind of just have a pretty black and white resume, which is totally fine. Sometimes they want to just do something kind of interesting in the heading to help their name stand out a little bit. So you definitely need your full name, the name that you go by in this section. You want to have your address. Well, city and state is fine. I will say you don't really need your full address anymore regardless, but if local to the position, you should include the city and state. If you're applying across the country, you might just have your email and phone on your resume because you're not trying to highlight that you're currently out of state and have to transition. So in general, you don't need to have your full address anymore on resumes. Contact info, so phone number for sure. They are probably most likely to email you first, but I would still include the best phone number to reach you at. Either your Emerson email is fine as you're a student, or a professional email. So nothing like kind of cutesy or unprofessional, something with some form of your name and like a number or something like that. You can easily make like a Gmail or account if you don't have one. Possible links. So as Drew had mentioned, if you have a portfolio, so it could be like a YouTube page or Vimeo page, could be another professional website. If you are, say, you are all in EIV, so I'm guessing you might be VMA majors, but I know that there's some students with other majors too. So if you're like a journalism major, maybe use Twitter all the time and it's professional and you use that. So it really depends, but you want to make sure any links in there are to a professional site that you want employers to see, because they will click on it. So to move on to the next section, because you're a student, your kind of most relevant experience, what's most similar to you having like a full-time job, is what you're studying at Emerson, especially if you're applying to internships. So, or to on-campus, clubs and orgs like related to your major. So you want your education to be the next thing on your resume after your heading. So Emerson should be first. If you are a first-year student or a sophomore, you can still include your high school. I typically take it off after sophomore year. If you've attended relevant summer programs, like I sometimes see students who've attended like an NYU like screenwriting program or anything kind of the sort, or taken classes at a community college or transferred from a community college or something like that, that can go on your resume. It doesn't necessarily have to, but it definitely can. You want to include your minor if you have one. With your major, maybe it doesn't say this here. Oh, it's on, never mind, it's the next slide. GPA, if 3.7 or above, you don't really have to have your GPA on your resume, but if you do have a very high GPA, you can certainly put it on there. And then in some cases, you might include on-campus orgs on your resume. You'll see on our resume samples, we show a variety of ways to format information. And as we're going to be talking about, as we talk about these experience sections, it really depends on what you've done and what you're applying for in terms of where things go. So in some cases, a student might put a bullet point under Emerson to include some affiliations on campus. Other than that is honors or awards. So like if you have been on Dean's List, you might include that because it's an educational based awards. Sometimes athletics, student will include if they are a member of a team at Emerson. And in some cases too, you might include relevant coursework or projects in this section. Again, tailoring it to what position you're applying for. So as you can see here is an example. So this shows a student listing their degree. They have their GPA and Dean's List underneath and a member of the softball team, and still include their high school at this point. Typically, like I said, you'd take the high school off after your sophomore year, if not earlier, unless you have a really compelling reason to keep it on, like say your high school has like a well-known alumni base in the city you're applying for or something like that. Now, what's important to note here is you want to make sure you have your degree correctly. So know whether or not your degree is a Bachelor of Arts, a Bachelor of Fine Arts, or a Bachelor of Science. A lot of students don't know. And also you want to make sure to write it correctly. So I meet with a lot of students, if you are a VMA major, technically there's two majors in the departments, media production or media studies. So you would want to have, or the BFA program as well, you'd want to have, most of the students I see are like BA media production. So you don't need to put the department name, but just your major within the department, if that makes sense. Okay. And then as we start to get into the experience sections, we're going to show you at the end some sample resumes. And like I said, we'll also email you and share some information with you. There's probably going to be multiple types of experience sections on your resume. Typically, we recommend after education that your next section be related experience. And by related, we mean most related to what you're applying for. So this is where, when I was talking earlier about having different targeted versions of your resume, the related experience for one type of job is likely to be different than the related experience for a very different type of job. And you don't necessarily need to divide things on your resume based on what they are. Like sometimes I see resumes that come in and like one section is for internships, one section's for like paid work, like pay the bill type jobs that you've had over the summer. And then there's another section for student clubs. Especially when you're writing like one of your first resumes, you want to think about what have I done that's most relevant. So it could be a mix of things like paid work, internships, organizations, volunteer work. I'm more concerned about what's most relevant than like what that experience was. And then often you'll have another section for additional experience, which might be some of those like summer jobs, or it could be volunteer work, things that you might not automatically think. Like you might think, well, I worked at an ice cream shop over the summer, that's not relevant. But it actually is good to include things like that because employers like to know that you've had work experience, that you know what it's like to have a job, that you're reliable because you kept a job, and also other skills that come from that, like customer service skills and communication skills and things that are transferable to many other types of positions. So they're not going to take up as much space on your resume as the things that are most relevant, like say a club that you've been in or an internship you've had that's much more similar to what you're applying for, but they will likely still be on your resume just further down in more of an additional experience section. And now Drew is going to talk a little bit more about experience sections.
So this area here is more about formatting and how you are presenting the information about your job. So the paragraph style is simply how we have it laid out here. So you have your paragraph style where it says that's your job title, your name, or the name of the position, excuse me. And then you have short phrases that are grouped together. So excluding personal pronouns is a big one. So getting rid of like I, we. You want to talk about what you did, how you contributed to that organization, and how you helped that organization grow. Overall, this helps save space, and it can be harder to skim. So if you're adding personal pronouns, most employers or most readers are going to skim through the resume to see how relevant it is. So you want to make sure while they're skimming that you're highlighting some important keynotes of when you apply to that job. So when you have shorter or fragmented style bullets that can break and separate, and again, when you format that, you want to make sure that the reading is very light and easy to read for that employer or reader.
Great.
I keep clicking it thinking that I can do it. So building strong bullet points, while the bullet points are short, they should be very concise and very strong. So you want to show accomplishments, you want to show results, you want to show what you did while you're there. It shouldn't be a list of duties. Like if you were, I always say this as an example, if you were a server at a restaurant and one of your bullet points was that you served food, that's presumptuous. We understand that servers serve food. So you want to always begin with a strong action verb. I always run through thesaurus and check out action verbs and change what I'm using. And again, excluding personal pronouns, you want to get rid of like I, we, she, he. Some things you want to do is the results, as I said before, what you did, what kind of action did you create or make that resulted in X action with the company. We always try to tell students to get rid of words like assisted or worked or helped. We want to know what you did independently. The reader wants to know what you did independently. And then here when it says include numbers on bullet should, that means if you're a salesperson, how many sales did you make in the year? People want to see that result and context as well. And the last thing you want to be weary of is, again, going through thesaurus and checking your verbs, because you don't want to use the same action verb like learned. Not every bullet should start with, I learned this, I learned that.
Great. Thanks, Drew. And I think you're talking about the STAR method too.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm falling into. So this could all be concised into the STAR method. So STAR stands for situation, task, action, result. So the situation, what were you doing at the job? So you're working for a nonprofit, animal shelter. The task that you had at hand was helping raise funds for the community and planning those community events. The action, so that's what I was referring to earlier. What did you do at the job specifically? So here we have educational event, creating home dog treats that cost $20 to attend. And then I put all of that money into the shelter. So what that tells the person is that you have some philanthropic work and that you have some organization skills and some accounting skills all in that. And the last one is the result. So at all of this, at this job, what did you end up doing for the company? How did you end up helping the company grow? And then down at the bottom, it explains how this raised $600 for shelter through an hour event versus the one above it, which explains a little bit further about how you increased awareness to the community, engaged and involved.
Great.
So this is an ideal layout of how a job should look. I tend to put the dates closer to the title, so the reader doesn't have to go all the way to the right. So you do want to be careful about right margins and fleshing things to the right. But you have the title of your position, head choreographer or head videographer, excuse me, and where it was, which the Morgan School Athletics Department, and it was in Clinton, Connecticut. And then below that, you have the descriptors of the job. So you collaborated, scheduled, edited, and created. So those are 4 separate verbs that tell me, if I just read those 4 verbs, excuse me, and communicated, that would explain to me what you're good at, what kind of skill set do you have, and what you've learned at the job, and what you specifically have done for the organization. I think I am passing it now to Marissa to further explain objectives and those smaller sections of the resume.
Yes, thank you, Drew. So there's some other sections you've probably seen or heard about on resumes that you may or may not have on yours. So one is an objective, which usually goes at the top. This is something I don't recommend this too often to students. You might use an objective if you feel that, so say sometimes if someone is like looking to do something that they have very little, if no experience in, and they're trying to frame their experience for the employer. So the employer is reading the resume through the lens of really looking for those transferable skills. The thing about an objective is a lot of times I read them and they're very generic and they just don't really add anything. So if you're going to do it, you want to have a good reason. So like, I really want to make X clear to the reader, and you need to be specific. So you don't want to just put a general one on every version of your resume and send it out like that, because it doesn't enhance it. So we can always help you decide if you need one. More often than not, I don't think students do, but there might be a case for it. Volunteer experience, again, that might be its own section. It could potentially go in an additional experience section. Sometimes a student will have a separate section for honors or awards, particularly if you've done some work in your industry, like say you've won some prizes at a screenwriting competition or a film festival or something like that. You might have a separate section for honors or awards. Course projects could be its own section, depending upon, again, like what else you've done and what you're applying for. So like, what are you trying to show the employer? And occasionally professional associations and trainings become relevant, often closer to like graduation as you gain more experience. But you might not need that regardless. So we can always help you. Like if you're unsure of what sections you need, you can always like submit to the resume checkup we mentioned, or you can schedule an appointment. And like I said earlier, I'll send you out some resources and kind of how to get help from us after the workshop, so that you can, yes, you can take advantage of working with us if you need any help figuring out what sections to use. So here is some examples. If you did have a volunteer experience section, say you're someone who's done a lot of volunteer work and you really want to highlight that, so maybe you have it in its own section. This is a way it could look. And you can see this person's not including bullet points. They're just kind of showing what they did, because it's kind of understood in a lot of volunteer roles, like they were an event volunteer and a check-in volunteer. We kind of understand typically what those roles do. So this person probably focused in their related experience on experiences with more detail, most relevant to what they want to do next. And so then they didn't have the space or need to go into more detail about what they did at these roles, because they're not the focus of the resume. You can see an example here of a student talking about a relevant course project. This can be really helpful as you're looking for your first internship, especially. And sometimes later too, if you've done like a great project that shows really good hands-on experience. It's the projects you do at Emerson and the clubs and organizations that help you gain the experience to get your first internship. So that's why some students will include some projects on their resume, and you can see a good example of one here. And then, as we talked a little bit about earlier, the skills section typically goes towards the bottom of the resume. This is really for what we'd call hard skills. So those are like measurable skills. So computer skills, equipment skills, language skills, things that you can really rate your proficiency on. And you don't necessarily have to include proficiency unless you're trying to show you just have some very basic knowledge. I think if you can use something well enough that if they gave you an assignment on an internship or whatever, you'd be pretty comfortable taking that assignment on that software or whatever it is. But if you just have very basic knowledge, but you want to mention that you know it, you might qualify that. But yeah, so think about hard or measurable skills in these areas. You do not need to include soft skills. So a soft skill is more like a people skill. So communication, negotiation, customer service. Generally, your soft skills are what we're going to be seeing through those bullet points and those action verbs you're using in your bullet points. So we don't need to repeat them in this section, and showing us in your bullet points is better than just telling us. So it's kind of that show rather than tell. And you don't need to include a bunch of unrelevant like software programs that you can use. So you can see an example here of what a skills section should look like. So it's pretty quick. It doesn't need to take up a lot of space. And it's pretty simple and to the point. So let's see. Okay. And I think I'm going to hand it over to Drew to some kind of last minute thoughts here.
So some things to remember when you're making your resume, and again, you'll probably have like two or three on the back burner and one general one, but they should be targeted. So if you're applying for a job or a career or a field, the resume should be targeted so the reader gets an idea of what you're looking for and what you're interested in based on your experiences. We try to keep everything to one page, so going further than that, the reader can easily skip over. Error-free is something that I always advise to students when doing resumes, especially tenses. You want to be wary about using ing and ed and how to use that in present tense. Consistent formatting, so this is something that I mentioned earlier, is that you want to make sure that your font, your layout, and your text are all the same, even the type of bullets, even ending with periods and not ending with periods. Sometimes people do their bullets and they forget to add punctuation and it's not consistent. Action verbs, so like I said, the thesaurus is going to be your best friend when making a resume, and it should tell your story. So that not an about me section, but it should tell your work experience. Who is this person and what kind of work are they interested in doing? And then some final thoughts are three things. When you look at your resume, how do you feel? Are you invited in? Do your eyes land where the most highlighted information is? Is it overwhelming? Is there too much? Or are you underwhelmed? Is there too much blank space? Error-free, and does it follow that resume format? And then is it super hyper-focused to the kind of position that you're going to be applying? And then the following slides are some sample resumes that we have.
Yes, so here's two samples. These are both VMA samples, but we have lots of other samples on CareerBuzz. You can see the layout of these two is very different, but they both work. So there's a lot of different things that can work here. And again, that's something we can help you kind of figure out if you're unsure. The one on the left is probably what I see the most often, this kind of one column format along with like the sections here. You can see the student has a good header. You can see the name very clearly, portfolio, phone number and email. Education's very clear. The first section, like we talked about, is for their most relevant experience. On this resume here, you can see a short section for other production experience. Students often use this if they've worked on a variety of other sets, like through classes or on campus clubs, and they want to show a range, but they clearly don't have room to describe every single one, and it would probably get redundant. So this is a way to list some other projects, but you definitely have to have detail with some projects so the employer can see the skills that you were using within those bullet points. And you'll see the additional experience section, which is mainly work and a little volunteer experience, and then skills like we talked about. And then the resume on the right, the Xavier example, is two columns, which can work very well, I think, but there are some cases where I feel like sometimes it's hard to know where to look first. I think this one works well because the left column is slimmer than the right, and I clearly can see the contact info, education, and the most relevant experience first. Those are the things I notice right away. The skills section looks a little different, but it works fine. This person does have an award section because they wanted to highlight something in particular. And then you'll see everything on the right-hand side is related production experience. So this is probably a resume used more by a senior or recent grad, as opposed to the one on the left is probably more for a student. But there's lots of different ways your resume can look, and you can look at our samples. They're for all different industries, but you can look at the many different styles and designs and kind of see what you like and what works with your content too. And then the last thing here, we mentioned earlier, CareerBuzz has a wealth of resources on it. I'll send you the link to that. And you can also access our online resume reviews on CareerBuzz. And we get back to you within about 2 to 3 business days with feedback over email on your resume. You can also submit cover letters to that. So I think that's all that we have. I would love to hear if any of you have questions. Like we said earlier, you can submit them to the chat. You can also just ask if that's easier, but we're available for some questions if you have any. No questions? Okay, So if it works for you, I will, like I said, I'll send an email out. I can send you the link to the slides as well as to our other resources. So you can access that and schedule an appointment or submit your resume to be reviewed if you'd like some feedback. And you can also always email us at careers@emerson.edu with questions. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming today. We hope this was helpful, and feel free to let us know if there's anything we can help with.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.